Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Tax in 10 with me, Rachel de Souza, and Andrew Robbins. We are both tax partners in RSM's London office and have a wealth of experience in dealing with a wide range of private client matters. Your feedback is valuable to us, so do keep it coming, especially if you have thoughts on any topics you would like us to cover.
So, Rachel, as you know, I've been out of circulation for a couple of weeks, and I could really do with your help on explaining one of the things that's hit my desk on my return. This isn't directly a tax issue, but I think it is really relevant to our world because it's going to affect a lot of international structures that we deal with. So, can you please explain to me what the Overseas Entities Register is, and why am I suddenly seeing references to it?
I can certainly enlighten you on this subject, Andrew. In fact, the proposals for a register have been kicking around since 2016. And to be fair, much of the groundwork had been done by 2018 when a draft bill was published.
Okay.
However, it didn't make the statute books back then. The purpose of the register is to identify the beneficial owner of all real estate in the UK where it is held by an overseas entity. And the reason that this was required is because significantly large amounts of UK real estate is held by non-UK companies or trusts, and the actual beneficial owners are not identified at the land registry. Way back in 2016, the fear was that these entities could be a front for money laundering purposes or other forms of corruption.
Okay, so it's pretty obvious why this has come back to the top of the political agenda, given events in Ukraine. But from a practical point of view, what's that going to mean both for individuals who do indirectly own UK property, but also for the people who are running those structures?
Okay, so for ultimate beneficial owners, the intention is that they won't be able to hide their identity behind complicated ownership structures.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the legislation looks to do this is by requiring information to be provided for anybody who has direct or indirect control of more than 25% of a property owning company, or anybody who can exercise significant influence or control over a company or trust or any other entity which owns UK property.
Okay, I mean, that sounds pretty comprehensive, but I guess one obvious question to ask about it is who's actually going to get information, get access to that information, and what information will they get to see?
And this is a really important point, isn't it, Andrew? Because there are legitimate reasons why many wealthy families will have used an entity, and often that will actually be to preserve their anonymity for security purposes rather than any other reason.
Yeah.
Now, there are different levels of information that will be publicly available depending on the type of structure being used. So at the simplest level, if a non-resident individual owns residential property, then the details are already publicly available via the UK Land Registry. But if a non-resident individual owns shares in an offshore company which owns UK real estate, then details of that shareholder will now need to be provided to the register. And some of that information will be public, such as the person's name and what they refer to as a service address. More detailed information, such as their residential address, will need to be provided, but it's not going to be made public.
Right. Fair enough. I assume the legislation is smart enough to deal with more complicated situations, such as ownership by trusts or nominees or whatever.
Yes, of course, the drafter has thought about this. And in the case of trusts, the trustee has to provide quite detailed information, including the name of the trust, when it was created, the names and addresses of the beneficiaries and the settlor. However, much of this information will not be made public.
That sounds very similar to the existing trust registration service, which requires you to file details about some trusts, which again isn't public. And it does sound quite comprehensive. But so when does it take effect?
Oh, this is the interesting one. The register is not yet live, but once it is, you'll only have 6 months to report the information. And it's going to apply to any property held on or after 28th of February 2022. Because the responsibility is generally with the company directors or the trustees, professionals are going to need to get their act together to make sure that they are able to comply within the timescale.
It's interesting, this is effectively backdated to February, so you won't be able to avoid registering by disposing of the property because you've already got it, you're already caught. This may be a dumb question, Rachel, but by definition, all of those people who are going to have to register and give information are already based outside of the UK. So what happens if they just ignore the requirement?
Great question. Failure to comply will actually be a criminal offence, so potentially you could go to prison. Of course, they're overseas. You might not be too bothered about that if you never plan to set foot in the UK. But there is also the sanction that if you haven't registered, you won't be able to sell the property or get a mortgage on it. And those are really effective sanctions to force compliance. So for once, the government has been, I think, actually quite innovative in considering the implementation of this policy.
It does sound like it. It does sound like that's a really effective way to make people comply, because if you can't refinance or sell the property, sooner or later you're going to have to come clean. It's just a shame that it seems that it's taken them 6 years to get from the idea to actually implementing it.
Such is life. Anyway, so Andrew, with all this time you've had at home, have you read or seen something that's worth sharing with us?
I actually want to recommend something I've been listening to. 6 Music on a Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Stuart Marconi's Freak Zone. As the name suggests, this is a collection of sort of experimental and weird music. So it's everything from 1960s psychedelia through to experimental electronic music or freeform jazz, or you name it. It can be a bit challenging at times, but it really is great, and it really sort of opens your vistas to new things.
Well, for those that don't want to listen to challenging music, perhaps they should try Sounds of the 80s with Gary Davis and BBC Sounds.
Not quite the same.
Anyway, thank you for listening. Please do let us have your comments and feedback, and we can be contacted on andrew.robbins@rsmuk.com and rachel.d'souza@rsmuk.com. Until next time.
Bye.